So the factory farms is a large system that produces all the meat, almost all the meat in America today. They produce and raise hogs, chickens, livestock in these massive operations that are like warehouses of animals. Sometimes you have 80,000, 100,000 birds in a single confinement facility, tens of thousands of hogs, all basically, in prison. And these factory farms that produce the vast majority of America's meat are incredibly abusive to the animals, unhealthy for the animals. They produce phenomenal amounts of waste and pollution. So they've become a top polluter of America's rivers and streams, literally killing tens of millions of fish in manure runoff. This shouldn't even call it manure, really. I mean, this is waste from these giant facilities. They have these massive lagoons that are literally the size of football fields, filled with hog waste, for instance. And there's evidence of ozone depletion in regions like in North Carolina, where they've got tons of these hog factory farms. And so we're seeing serious air pollution coming from these factory farms. There are studies showing that people who live near these facilities are getting sick, having respiratory disorders and asthma problems, throat problems. So it's like this is a serious public health issue as well as animal abuse issue. And this is the basis on which America's meat and chicken supply is being raised, and raised horribly, and then processed in their killing lines thereafter. So they have these very short, very sort of drug-boosted lives with lots of antibiotics and hormones, and they often, the chickens especially and the hogs, basically don't get to move during their lifetime. They just sit there in these pens, living often in their own excrement. And there are stories of truckloads of these hogs being shipped to the processing facility, and somehow the truck opened up and the hogs would spill out onto the highway. And hogs are known as running beasts, and they didn't know what to do. They just stood there on the road, so this is like the way they're being raised is entirely outside of their nature. Yeah, I mean, factory farms are one of the top polluters now of America's waterways. So they literally they've killed tens of millions of fish. They've also led to more than 35,000 miles of America's riverways being polluted. They are identified as a major source of a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, which is the size of New Jersey. It's phenomenal. And this is an area where you've got all these algae blooms, and there's no aquatic life to speak of in that region of the Gulf of Mexico due to pesticide runoff and chemical fertilizers, but also increasingly from factory farm waste. So, I mean, what these facilities do is they spray all of their excess waste. First they dump so much of it into these huge lagoons, and then they spray their excess waste onto nearby farm fields. So they actually either buy up the land for that purpose or pay a local farmer to let them, spray their fields with this hog waste, which is not normal manure. This is like highly condensed, highly toxic, and it's filled with methane gases that are, part of climate change. So, and then it runs off into groundwater and rivers and streams. So it's a major source of pollution now in America. I mean, the production of meat. And we've also seen that the meat industry has become one of the top sources of climate change. Factory farms are the basis of that. Basically by condensing and consolidating meat production and all these animals into one space, all the waste they produce, the kind of feed that they're given that worsens the waste problem, and the gases that come out of them, is now combined as a major contributor to climate change. No, it's an amazing story. I mean, you know, we talk about the family farm. It's this nice American postcard image. And, you know, politicians love to talk about this every 5 years or in any election cycle, saving the family farm, which is, and they don't do anything to actually do that. So we're losing tens of thousands of farms every year, mostly small farms or medium-sized farms. And literally one every half an hour in this country is going under. You know, we lost 100,000 farms between like 2007 and 2012, just to give another example. So one of the main reasons for this is the consolidation in the farm sector. So as the large food processors and supermarket corporations and fast food industries dominate the food industry, they dominate what gets grown and how it gets grown, they demand large-scale production and monocrop production from, you know, and they want large-scale producers to do this. Another big, so that's one reason. And another big reason is because farmland costs continue to rise. You know, as development encroaches on farm areas, there's more competition for, you know, rising those prices in farmlands. And, you know, you get also a situation where, you know, the cost of machinery and the cost of petrochemical fertilizers and pesticides, which are oil-based, those prices go up. So all what we call the inputs, all the ingredients that go into farming, have increased dramatically. Meanwhile, the benefits for small farms, you know, the prices they can command in the marketplace to survive or thrive have remained stagnant or worsened. Another key indicator is that farmers' share of the overall food dollar has shriveled dramatically in recent decades. So back in the 1950s, farmers were getting about 40 cents of every food dollar that we spent was going back to the farmer. It's a reasonable share. You've got supermarkets, you've got other people in the middle doing stuff, but you know, now it's a nickel. You know, and there's study after study of, you know, a box of cereal and the farm, you know, all the wheat or corn or soy that went into that, and then the farmer's getting a nickel or less for that food dollar. So it's harder and harder for them to survive, and the only way that they can survive is either doing some fancy niche product, if they're lucky enough to be in an area where they can actually get that to market, or getting subsidies and supports. But only the large-scale farmers get most of the supports that we have from our tax dollars. So the subsidy system is another big reason. You know, 70% of all of our subsidies going to large-scale agriculture for these giant farms that feed the demands of corporate agribusiness, while the small farms get almost nothing. Yeah, I would say we should reverse that situation. I mean, I think that there's so many reasons why the current system is a disaster for everybody, including many farmers, by the way, who want to change the way that they produce food. They'd like to diversify their production. They'd like to go organic. There's so many things that farmers would like to do, and they're in this trap, whether it's the, you know, we call it a pesticide trap, petrochemical trap, you know, or, you know, in terms of just producing what the giant trading corporations like Cargill and ADM, what they demand, which is like soybeans or corn, you know, sold to a giant grain elevator, and there might only be one in the whole state. So there's no negotiating power for farmers. You know, what I would like to see is us, you know, really reverse this situation where our tax dollars and our public investments are going to a food production system that sustains small farms, mid-sized farms. Study after study has shown that small and mid-sized farms are the best for rural communities in terms of having a diversity of producers, diversity of land ownership, and having more of these farmers that help sustain rural economies. So when you get to a situation where you're losing all these farmers one every half an hour, we see farm towns and rural areas across the country decimated by the situation because there's no support for all the other surrounding businesses that farmers support in those communities. So, you know, and then it's bad for our health and bad for the environment and the future of our planet and for soil and everything else to have these massive monoculture systems where you've got 5,000, 10,000 acres, 2,000 acres of just all corn, all soy, maybe all wheat, and no crop rotation, all petrochemical based, destroying the soil. And, these are the kinds of things that our tax dollars are being invested in right now, really to the detriment and the harm of all of us, farmers and consumers and the environment. So it's really a shame because we're paying once with our tax dollars, and then we're paying again for all the harm that creates. And we need to reverse that situation urgently.